The doctors had been coming for 3 months, and not one of them had reached her. They came with their clipboards and their careful language. Their voices measured the way professionals learn to measure them. Never too warm, never too cold, always at a distance that kept them safe. They sat across from Lily in the bright room on the second floor and asked her questions she refused to answer. And then they wrote things down in their notebooks and told Renata Holloway-Vance that her granddaughter was processing, and that these things took time, and that she should be patient. And then they collected their fees and drove away in their quiet cars, and the house stayed quiet in a different way, a way that felt like something held underwater. Renata was 63 years old. She had built a logistics software company from a second-hand laptop in a one-bedroom apartment in Scarborough, had taken it public 12 years later, had been on the cover of 3 business magazines, and named to the Order of Canada, had negotiated contracts with people who had tried very hard to make her feel small, and none of it, none of the boardrooms, or the headlines, or the handshakes, had prepared her for the silence of an 8-year-old who had decided that speaking was no longer worth the trouble. Lily had not spoken since the accident. Not to the doctors, not to Renata, not to her school counselor, or the grief therapist, or the family friend who had driven 3 hours from Kingston because someone thought a familiar face might help. Not a word since the November evening when the car came through the intersection and took Renata's daughter and son-in-law both, leaving Lily in the back seat with a seatbelt bruise across her chest and a silence that had lasted, now, 104 days. Renata counted. She did not mean to, but she counted. The house on Briar Hill Avenue was too large for the two of them. Renata had bought it when her daughter Camille was pregnant, imagining a different future. Sunday dinners, school projects spread across the dining room table, noise and clutter, and the kind of chaos she had never had growing up. The house had 4 bedrooms and a backyard with an oak tree, and in the summer there were wild raspberries along the fence that Camille had liked to pick with her hands and eat standing up, juice on her fingers, not bothering to rinse them. Lily knew about the raspberries. Renata had seen her stand at the back window in late winter and look at the snow-covered fence the way a person looks at something they are trying not to think about. Renata was not, by nature, someone who asked for help. She had raised Camille largely alone after her husband left, had kept the business running through a recession and a global supply chain collapse, and a period of personal difficulty she referred to. When she referred to it at all, simply as a hard stretch. She had a senior staff and a personal assistant and a housekeeper who came twice a week, but those were professional arrangements, not the kind of help she meant. The kind she was struggling to name even to herself. It was her assistant, Bertrice, who suggested the companion. Not a therapist, Bertrice said carefully. Not another doctor, just someone to be with Lily during the days. A presence, someone patient and calm who didn't have an agenda. Renata did not love the idea. She was not sure why, exactly. Some combination of pride and guilt, and the nagging feeling that she should be enough on her own. But she had watched Lily push her breakfast around her plate that morning, without eating any of it, and she had tried to say something, and found that the words came out all wrong, stiff and careful. The way the doctor's words were stiff and careful, and Lily had looked at her with dark, assessing eyes and then looked back at her plate. So Renata said yes. The agency sent 3 candidates. 2 of them were pleasant and credentialed, and spoke in the same measured register as the therapists. Lily sat in the corner of the living room during each meeting and observed them with the particular attention of a child who has learned to read adults very quickly. And when Renata asked her afterward what she thought, Lily did not answer, but she also did not look engaged in any way that suggested interest. The 3rd candidate was late, not late in an apologetic way. Late in the way of someone who had navigated a transit delay with a calm that held no particular guilt. She arrived at the door carrying her coat over one arm because she had been warm on the bus, and she introduced herself as Odessa, and she did not immediately try to find Lily in the room or make a point of noticing her. She took off her boots in the entryway without being asked. set them neatly aside, and accepted the chair Renata offered her, with the ease of someone accustomed to sitting in other people's houses, without making those people feel like they were being assessed. She was perhaps 32. She had a quiet face, the kind that showed things when it showed them, and did not perform things when it didn't. She had grown up in Hamilton, she said, had a background in early childhood development, had worked with children in various contexts, after-school programs, foster care placements, a summer camp for kids from low-income families. She did not use clinical language. She did not say grief response or developmental regression. She said she liked children who were going through hard things because they were usually more honest than adults, and they always knew when you weren't being straight with them. From the corner of the room, Lily was watching. Renata noticed. She was careful not to show that she had noticed. Odessa stayed an hour and did not once try to speak to Lily directly or engage her in any performed way. When she was leaving, she paused in the entryway to put on her boots, and while she was lacing them, she said to no one in particular, or to the room in general, which happened to include an 8-year-old in the corner, that the oak tree in the back looked like a climbing tree. Good low branches, the kind she used to fall out of when she was small. She pulled on her coat and said goodbye to Renata and left. Lily crossed the room to the back window and looked at the oak tree for a long time. Renata called the agency in the morning. Renata had not intended to observe. That was not how she thought of what she was doing. She was working. The study on the second floor looked out over the backyard, and she was at her desk, and if she sometimes paused over a contract or a quarterly report to look out the window at whatever was happening below, that was simply the natural distraction of a window, not surveillance, not anything so deliberate, but she watched. The first week, Odessa came each morning at 8:30 and left at 4. She did not arrive with activities or crafts or structured plans. She arrived with herself, which was somehow both less and more. She made breakfast, not elaborate breakfasts, but real ones, eggs done properly, toast that didn't come out burned, and she sat at the kitchen table while Lily sat at the other end, and she talked in a quiet, unhurried way about whatever she happened to be thinking. The TTC delays, a documentary she had watched about migratory birds, the fact that she had once tried to learn to knit and had produced something that might have been a scarf or might have been a very long pot holder. It was hard to say. She did not ask Lily questions. She did not ask how she was feeling or what she was thinking or whether she wanted to talk about her mom and dad. She talked the way a person talks when they're comfortable with silence, not filling it anxiously, but offering something into it in case the other person wanted to take it. By the third day, Lily had moved to the closer end of the table. Renata saw this from the kitchen doorway and went back to her study and sat for a few minutes without doing anything. The second week, it rained for 4 days straight. Renata was on calls most of the day, back to back, the Toronto office, and then Vancouver, and then a legal matter that required a 3-way call across 2 time zones. She was pulling on her suit jacket one morning when she heard something from the floor below that made her stop. She stood still in the hallway. It wasn't words. It was a sound, small and involuntary, the kind of sound that comes out of a person before they've decided to make it. A child's surprised sound, something close to a laugh. Renata walked to the top of the stairs and stood there. From the living room below, she could hear Odessa's voice, low and even, telling some kind of story. She couldn't make out all the words. Something about a dog that kept stealing things from the neighbors. Something about a woman named Mrs. Pelletier on the 3rd floor who collected ceramic owls and didn't think anyone knew. The story was rambling and specific in the way of stories that are actually true, and somewhere in the middle of it, Lily made that sound again. Small and escaping, and Renata pressed her hand flat against the wall and stood there until her next call was supposed to start. She began to invent reasons to be on the ground floor. This was not something she acknowledged to herself as deliberate. She framed it as needing things: coffee, a file she'd left on the kitchen counter, a phone charger that was definitely somewhere downstairs. She moved through the rooms quietly. the way she moved in hotel hallways, and she listened. She heard Odessa teach Lily a card game that involved slapping the table at specific moments. She heard Odessa read aloud from a chapter book. Not a children's book exactly, or not only a children's book, something with a real plot and characters who made bad decisions and had to live with them. She heard Odessa make lunch and narrate what she was doing in a loose, instructional way. Not as a lesson, but as conversation. As if Lily were a small adult who might be interested in why you salt the pasta water and when. She did not hear Lily speak, but she heard Lily's presence in the room. The small adjustments, a chair scraping, footsteps across the kitchen tile, the particular quality of a silence that is occupied rather than empty. Lily was there. Lily was engaged. It was different from the way the house had felt before Odessa came. And the difference was hard to name precisely, but Renata felt it in the way you feel a shift in temperature, before you can say what exactly has changed. The fourth week, on a Thursday, Renata came downstairs at noon and found them in the backyard. The snow had thinned enough to show the dead grass underneath, and there was a cold, bright quality to the air that sometimes came in February, when the sun was genuine even if the warmth wasn't. Odessa was standing at the base of the oak tree. Lily was 6 feet up, holding a branch, looking down. Renata stopped at the back window. She could not hear what was being said, but she could see the shape of it. Odessa talking, relaxed, arms loose at her sides, no alarm in her posture. Lily saying something. Her mouth was moving, just slightly, the movement so small it might have been breath. And then Odessa responding, tilting her head, listening with the fullness that some people have, and most people don't, where their whole body orients toward the other person. Lily's mouth moved again. Renata's chest did something she wasn't prepared for. Not a pain exactly. More like something that had been held tight, releasing all at once, the physiological equivalent of a breath you have been holding without knowing you were holding it. She stepped back from the window before they could turn around and see her. She went upstairs and sat at her desk and did not open her laptop for a long time. That evening, she asked Lily how her day was, and Lily looked at her, and the silence stretched, and Renata waited without pushing, which was something she was getting better at, slowly. And then Lily said, so quietly it was almost not a sound, "We climbed." 2 words. Renata said, "Was it high?" Lily held up her hand, palm flat, at about the level of her own shoulder. "That's pretty high," Renata said. Lily considered this. Then she went to her room. Renata stood in the kitchen and put her hand over her mouth. She had not meant to mention it to Odessa the next morning. She had not meant to bring it up at all, because some things are fragile in the way that acknowledging them too directly can change them. And she did not want to disturb whatever careful equilibrium had been building. But Odessa arrived and hung her coat, and Renata was making coffee, and found herself saying, quietly, her back to the room, "She spoke last night. Just 2 words, but..." She stopped. Odessa said, "I know." Renata turned around. "She's been talking to me for about a week," Odessa said. Not softly, not as if sharing a secret, but simply as one states a fact. "Not a lot. Little things. She told me the tree was scary. I told her it was only scary until you were on it. And then it was just a tree." She paused. She thought about that for a while, and then she decided she wanted to try. Renata set down her coffee cup. "She talks about her parents," Odessa said. "Not every day. Some days it's just practical things. But when it comes up, I listen. I don't try to make it mean anything or go anywhere. I just listen." "She won't talk to me," Renata said. It came out more plainly than she had intended, without the composure she usually managed. Odessa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "She loves you a lot. That's a different thing from talking." Renata nodded. She was not going to cry in her own kitchen in front of a woman she had hired 7 weeks ago. She was not. She pressed the inside of her wrist against the edge of the counter and looked out the back window at the oak tree. "It's harder," Odessa said, "to be soft with the people you love, because the stakes are higher." She started noticing other things. The way Odessa treated the house. Not overfamiliar, but not tentative either. She moved through the rooms with the ease of someone who respected other people's spaces without being anxious about them. When something was out of place, She put it back without making it a comment. When she found a photograph of Camille on the hallway shelf, she looked at it for a moment, and then said to Renata, who happened to be passing, that Lily had her mother's eyes, which was true, and that she must have been wonderful, which was also true, and she said it without the heavy performance of condolence, just directly, the way people speak when they mean the thing they are saying. Renata noticed the way Lily looked for her when she came home, not in an obvious way. Lily was a child who had learned to keep her cards close, which was something she had inherited from Renata, which Renata could not decide whether to feel guilty about. But there was a specific angle of attention that Lily's body took when Odessa arrived in the morning, a small orienting, like a plant adjusting toward light. It happened too naturally to be performed. It happened before Lily was thinking about it. She noticed the way Odessa talked about her own childhood without dramatizing it. She had grown up in a neighborhood where money was tight and expectations, from certain directions, were not always high, and she talked about this the way you talk about weather. Not pretending it hadn't happened, not making it a wound, just a fact about the landscape you'd grown up in. Renata knew something about that landscape. She had lived in a version of it herself, a different city, a different decade, the same arithmetic. One morning she said something to this effect, not elaborately, just a brief reference to the Scarborough apartment, the laptop, the early years, and Odessa listened with her whole face open in the way she had, not surprised, not performing surprise, just receiving it. "You made it work," Odessa said. "I made it something," Renata said. "I'm still not always sure what." March came, and the snow retreated in stages, giving up one strip of ground at a time. The raspberries along the back fence were still bare, but if you knew what you were looking for, you could see the first suggestion of green at the base of the canes, something alive that had been waiting underground. Lily spent a lot of time at the back window. One afternoon, Renata found her there and stood beside her, both of them looking out. After a while, Lily said, still facing the window, "Odessa says they come back? The raspberries?" Lily nodded. "They do," Renata said. Another silence, but a different kind, not empty, not held tight. "Mom used to eat them standing up," Lily said. "She didn't even wash them." "I know," Renata said. "She did that when she was your age, too." Lily was quiet for a moment. Then, "Did you tell her to wash them?" "Every summer," Renata said. "She ignored me every summer." The smallest sound came from Lily. It might have been a breath. It might have been something else. She was on a call, a long one, a vendor contract that had been snarling for 2 months. When she heard the back door open and close, she put herself on mute and crossed to the window. Odessa and Lily were in the backyard. Odessa was showing Lily something along the fence line, crouching to the level of the canes, pointing. Lily crouched too, her small coat bunching at the back, her face close to the fence. They were talking. Not like a teacher and a student, like two people looking at the same thing. She did not know how long she stood there. Long enough for the call to move past the point where her input was required. And it was only the sudden sharp voice of her legal counsel asking if she was still on that pulled her back. She unmuted herself and said yes. She was here. She was sorry. She had stepped away for a moment. She looked out the window one more time. Lily was laughing. A real laugh, the kind that isn't considered before it comes out. She had found something funny, something Odessa had said or done, and she was laughing the way children laugh when they are not thinking about how they look, entirely, without reservation. Renata finished the call. She closed her laptop. She went downstairs and made tea and sat at the kitchen table and waited for them to come back in from the cold. The conversation happened on a Tuesday, in late March, after Lily had gone up to bed, and the house had settled into its quiet. Renata had been working late, and Odessa was still there. She sometimes stayed later, when Renata had calls that ran long, and neither of them had ever formally arranged this. It had just become a pattern, the way certain things become patterns when no one has decided to stop them. Odessa was reading at the far end of the kitchen table. Renata came down and put the kettle on. They sat for a while without talking. This was another thing that had happened without being arranged, the ease of not talking. Renata had not had this with someone in a long time. She had professional relationships and collegial ones, and a few friendships that had been sustained across distance and busyness. But the particular comfort of sitting in a room with someone and finding the silence companionable rather than demanding, that had been in short supply for years. She said, eventually, "What you've done for her, what you're doing, I don't have words for it." Odessa looked up from her book. She did not deflect or perform modesty. She said, "She did most of it. She was already ready. She just needed someone to be steady around." "Not everyone can be that." "No," Odessa agreed. "Not everyone can." Renata wrapped her hands around her mug. Outside the window, the street was dark and cold, but inside the kitchen, the light was warm, and the kettle ticked as it cooled. "You grew up in Hamilton," she said. "Lower City," Odessa said. "Near the escarpment. I grew up in Scarborough. Before it was what it is now. Hard?" "Sometimes," Renata said. "Mostly just narrow. Like the possibilities had a specific size and shape, and nobody was encouraging you to imagine them differently." She paused. "I had one teacher who told me I was bright and meant it. Just one." Odessa looked at her steadily. "That's usually all it takes. Is that what happened for you?" "Something like that." She turned her teacup in her hands. "A woman in my building, when I was 11. She used to let me sit in her apartment and read her books. She didn't make a big thing of it. She just left the door open." Renata looked at the table. The grain of the oak, the old familiar surface. "That's what you do," she said. "You leave the door open." "It's not complicated," Odessa said. "It just requires patience." "I'm not known for patience." Odessa smiled, and the smile was genuine and direct. "Lily says you're getting better at it." Renata looked up. "She talks about you, you know," Odessa said. "More than you think." "What does she say?" "That you work very hard. That you used to travel a lot, and now you don't. That you make the same face when you're worried about something, whether you think you're showing it or not." A pause. "That she heard you crying once, through the door, and she didn't know what to do, so she just stood there for a while, in case you needed her." Renata did not say anything. "She's 8, Odessa said. "She's carrying a lot. She's also watching out for you. She shouldn't have to." "No," Odessa agreed. "But she wants to. That's love. That's what it looks like at 8, with a grandmother who's also going through something hard." She set down her cup. "She doesn't need you to have it all sorted. She just needs to know you're not going to disappear." Spring arrived properly in April. The raspberries came back, slow and persistent, the green climbing the canes in a way that felt, if you were inclined to let things feel like things, like a kind of answer. Lily noticed before anyone mentioned them. She came downstairs one Saturday morning and said to Renata, without preamble, "They're coming back." "I see that," Renata said. Lily looked out the back door. "Can we go look?" They went outside in their socks, which was not sensible, and which Camille would have said something about, and they stood at the fence and looked at the new green growing along the old canes. The morning was cold, and the ground was soft underfoot. Somewhere down the street, a dog was barking. Lily crouched down the way Odessa had shown her, and she looked at the base of the canes where the growth started, and she said, "Odessa says this part is the root. It doesn't die. Even when the rest of it looks dead, this part is still there." "She's right," Renata said. "Is that true for people too?" Renata crouched down beside her granddaughter. At this level the garden was a different world, all close detail, the veining in the leaves, the wet dark earth. She put her arm around Lily's small shoulders. "I think so," she said. "I think something stays." Lily leaned into her, not dramatically, not with the weight of everything she might have been carrying. Just the quiet lean of a child settling into a person they trust. They stayed there for a while, the two of them at the fence, while the street woke up around them, and the light moved through the morning. Odessa arrived a little after 9 and found them in the kitchen. Lily at the table with a bowl of cereal, and Renata standing at the counter with her coffee. And the room had the particular quality of a space where two people have been comfortable together, a warmth that is different from warmth because of a heater and something more. She said good morning and hung her coat and went to put the kettle on. Renata watched her move through the kitchen, familiar, unhurried, at ease, and she thought, "This is what a household feels like when it has what it needs," she said. "I want to talk to you about something." Odessa turned. "Not this minute," Renata said, "but today, when you have a moment." Odessa looked at her, not wary, not alarmed, just attentive in her way, reading the room with the ease of someone practiced at it. "Okay," she said. Lily, from the table, said without looking up from her cereal, "Is she in trouble?" "No," Renata said. "Are you going to ask her to stay?" Lily said. A small silence. "That was supposed to be a private conversation," Renata said. "I figured it out," Lily said, still looking at her cereal. "She comes every day. She knows where the good mugs are. She knows about the loose board on the second stair." A pause. "Also, you look at her like you're trying to figure out how to say something." Odessa laughed. A real, uncalculated sound that moved through the kitchen and took some of the gravity out of the air. Renata said, "You are far too observant for an 8-year-old. 9, Lily said. "My birthday was last week. Your birthday was last week and you're just mentioning it now?" "You remembered," Lily said. "You took me for dinner. I'm just saying I'm 9 now." She asked Odessa to stay not just for the days but for whatever came next, as a permanent part of the household, as someone who was not an employee in the transactional sense, but something that didn't have a clean name and didn't need one. She was aware this was not a conventional proposal and that it might land oddly, and she said as much. Odessa listened to all of it and then said, "You're asking me if I want to be part of this family. I suppose I am," Renata said. "That's not a small thing to ask." "No," Renata agreed. Odessa was quiet for a moment, not performing consideration but actually in it, looking at the middle distance with the focused expression of someone taking something seriously. Then she looked back at Renata and said, "I don't need it to have a title. I just need it to be real." "It's real," Renata said. "Then yes." That evening, after dinner, Lily went upstairs to read, and Renata and Odessa sat on the back porch in the cool April air with their tea. The raspberry canes moved slightly in the wind, the new growth bright against the old wood. Somewhere down the block, someone was having a barbecue, the smell of it drifting over the fence, something about it absurdly cheerful. Renata said, "She'll be okay, won't she?" It was not exactly a question. Odessa said, "Yes, she will." Not as reassurance but as fact, stated plainly, with the particular authority of someone who has spent a long time watching children move through hard things, and has learned to read the difference between a wound that heals and one that doesn't. She's already okay, in a lot of ways. She just needs time to know it. What about the ways she isn't? She has the two of you, Odessa said. She has this house. She has the raspberries. A slight pause. She'll be okay. Renata drank her tea. The evening settled around them, the light going amber and then pink at the edges of the sky, the oak tree at the far end of the yard holding its branches in the still air. Somewhere inside the house, Lily's footsteps crossed the floor above them, small and steady, and there, reliably there. "I was not a patient person," Renata said. "Before all this." "I know," Odessa said. "I'm still not, really." "I know that too," Odessa said, and there was something in her voice that was not quite a smile but carried one in it. Renata looked at the oak tree, its thick trunk and its good low branches. She thought about the root system underneath, invisible, reaching, holding the whole thing up through every season, doing its work without announcement. "Things stay," she had told Lily. "Something stays." The evening cooled around them, and neither of them moved to go inside, and the yard held the fading warmth of the day the way a garden does, releasing it slowly, patient and various and alive.